Hi, Rebecca, back from the beach. Hi, Dolores. All right, I wanted to revisit because it's such a powerful issue. The issue of working with greed and unchecked desire. Greed being unchecked desire, sort of being the stepchild to greed. And it's the first of the three poisons that the Buddha taught. You'll remember the other two were hatred and aversion and delusion, or not seeing things as they are. And the Buddha taught that each of these, all of these, lead to evil and bind us to suffer. And they have tremendous power to cause us suffering and cause suffering to the world and those around us if we don't manage them skillfully and mindfully. You know, our culture implicitly desires and promotes desire and greed. And so often we don't see it, and we're sort of blind to its dangers. You know, we look to people that money makers as heroes. You know, people, they present themselves as wise and virtuous. We don't see the destructive nature of this unchecked desire, this unchecked greed, really until sometimes it's too late. You know, neuroscience tells us that seeking pleasure is partly a function of brain chemistry. You know, it's a survival thing, right? I mean, and we know that dopamine, the neurotransmitter, creates the wanting of something and the motivation to get it, not so much the enjoyment of it once we have it. It's the motivating neurotransmitter. And when we talk about greed, we're not just talking about money. The Buddha talked about greed as it's translated as simply wanting a little bit more. Okay, so in other words, not being satisfied with what we have, whether it's our salary, our status, our home, our career, our prestige, you know, just not being satisfied. And he taught us that this wish to have just a little more is unending. It's ceaseless. Now, as most things we talk about, desire is not the sort of subset of greed is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's a necessary thing for our survival. But when it's unskillful and unchecked, it's when it gets into the realm of suffering. So it's a matter of how we manage our greed, our desire, so that it doesn't transform into greed. You know, desire for food, for fluid, for clean air, for procreation, for safety, those things keep us alive. I mean, we evolved to have all these desires. They're not the problem. And the function of our practice is to help us distinguish between healthy and unhealthy desires, between skillful and unskillful desires, because any desire can transform, if it's not managed skillfully, into greed and then even become a compulsion. And whenever there's greed predominant in our lives, whenever there's compulsion predominant in our lives, we're not free. And we call poorly managed desires in our culture and other cultures addictions. Okay. The Buddhism refers to compulsive desires as cravings, clingings, and thirst. One of the translations of it from the Pali is the word thirst. So careful attention to our inner life with our practice, with our meditation, can quickly reveal where these compulsions are, where they are in our mind, where they come from. And we see that they are everywhere once we begin paying attention to them. So it's really helpful using our mindfulness to discern between a simple desire, a simple craving, and the tension that it brings. You know, when we're caught up in a strong, unchecked desire, there's tension. That craving brings tension. You know, and it's important also to notice how preoccupation with unchecked desires, with greed, contributes to our alienation from others, because it takes us out of the present moment. It removes us from being fully present with others. This is especially true when we're lost in the fantasies that are fueled by our desires. Desires produce fantasies. We think about it. And unchecked desires are one of the primary disruptors of our connection with others. If I'm thinking about craving that pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream and I'm with you, I'm not really focused on you. I'm not really focused on our interaction. I'm thinking about the ice cream and I'm just sort of on autopilot with you. So when we're caught in this web of unchecked desire, we live on the surface of life. We're really not engaged with life fully and mindfully. We get preoccupied with the superficial trappings of life, outward appearances, possessions, all to the detriment of our inner life, all to the detriment of our quality of our inner life. And remember, as we've been talking about, happiness does not come from these superficial trappings. It doesn't come from more stuff. It doesn't come from more status. That's just a fool's errand. Because as soon as we get something we think that's going to bring us happiness, the novelty wears off, we're on to the next shiny object. Because with unchecked desires, with poorly managed desires or even addictions, everything becomes secondary to that desire. That becomes our focus, it becomes our preoccupation. And we're so preoccupied that we can't be fully present with life and we can't show up for meaningfully connecting with others. And too often healthy desires, appropriate, skillful desires, get crowded out by these overriding desires for pleasure. For example, we might want to eat healthy food, but then we find ourselves eating junk. So greed and unchecked desires are one of the first things that the Buddha talked about as obstacles to our freedom, as obstacles to our joy, as obstacles to our living a fully engaged life. Because these things, unchecked desires and greed, create a preoccupation with sensual pleasure, with comfort, with getting stuff. And this is a particularly hazardous challenge on our path, because reaching for pleasure and avoiding pain are so basic to our survival. They're so hardwired that they can override other considerations. So it's even true when the mind is still not to be caught up in other desires, this enticement can be operating. Oftentimes when I'm on a residential retreat and I'm sitting and I'm really quiet, I'm really still, all of a sudden I'll start thinking about lunch and what's they're going to have for dessert. Okay. It takes me right out of my stillness, right out of my quiet. I'm thinking about, because that's how fundamental desire is, because it's about survival. But if I don't check that, if I don't come back to the moment, then it's going to just take over. I'm going to spend the rest of that sit thinking about that carrot cake. So when the pull is strong, it pulls us into the world of making up stories. It pulls us into our imagination. It pulls us into fantasy. I'm sitting there in meditation thinking about how that carrot cake is going to taste, and I can actually start salivating. Okay, it is that powerful. Okay. And sometimes that fantasy is more than just the object of the carrot cake. Okay, there's nothing wrong with pleasure, but unchecked desire is a hindrance when it causes us not to stay present. The Abhidhamma, which was the Buddha's teaching, it's a whole teaching on psychology, Buddhist psychology. He says in there, this is a translation, that the proximate cause of our unhappiness is seeing enjoyment in things that put us in bondage. Let me repeat that. The Buddha says the proximate cause of our unhappiness is seeking and seeing enjoyment in things that actually put us in bondage. Okay, so let's talk about strategies for managing this, for managing our greed and unchecked desires. Okay, because each of those requires making a choice not to pursue that desire unchecked. Okay. So first we apply ourselves diligently and energetically to our meditation so we can practice getting quiet, practice spending time in the present moment. Because the effort required to do that becomes stronger when desire comes into the picture. It becomes more challenging. The effort to stay present is more challenging when that desire pops up, like the carrot cake on retreat. It's why I often say, don't meditate on an empty stomach. Don't meditate when you're exhausted. it's too much of a distraction. You're creating an obstacle that need not be there. Have a snack and then meditate, okay? Because the desire to eat or take a nap is too great a distraction. The second strategy is to take a careful look at the object of our desire. Okay? This is where discernment comes in. Are we really seeing it accurately? Where is it coming up in the body? Where am I feeling it in the body? Okay. What's behind it? Is it signaling something else? Loneliness, a lack of connection, sadness, anger, irritation. Very often we turn to desires. This is the nature of addiction, to avoid something unpleasant. I'd much rather have a snack than feel whatever I'm feeling. I'm lonely, I go to the cupboard. I'm sad, I open the refrigerator. Okay, so we need to get below the desire and see what is feeding it. Okay, what is the thing that's underlying it. Thirdly, we need to turn our attention away from the object of the desire and become aware of that subjective experience of desiring. Okay, how strong is it? What are the physical sensations of it? As I said a moment ago, where is it in the body? What is the quality of mind that accompanies it? Okay. Because the critical question here, the critical inquiry is, does our preoccupation with the object of our desire mask that discomfort? That's what I meant about avoiding, the sadness. I'd rather go get a snack. Okay. So to explore the nature of the unchecked desire, we don't push it away, we don't indulge it or act on it. We just sit with it, we allow it to flow, and then we bring our discernment and our desire to explore it to the experience. Because by turning to the subjective experience of the desire, we discover what else it's linked to. So if I sit with it, rather than going to the pantry and getting a snack, sit with it, oh, loneliness is coming up, a sadness, boredom. Boredom is a big one, okay, that will often feed our desire. Very often, unchecked desires are tied to ideas about security, success, need for reassurance, need for companionship, status, and so forth. So are we trying to use this sense pleasure, this desire to fill some emotional hole? Very often that's true. But with our mindfulness, with our present moment awareness, we bring spaciousness, we bring awareness, we bring a sense of connection, we override the desire. So the bottom line is, when we become familiar with our tendency toward greed and unchecked desire, freedom requires looking at it head on, facing it head on, naming it. Oh, this is desire. Feeling how it's experienced in the body. What is it really telling me? Oh, it's telling me that I have sadness in my chest. I have loneliness. I have irritation. I have tension. Feeling it, letting it go, and then moving on. Okay, so we engage with it, not to indulge it. We engage with it to understand it, to become familiar with it, to looking at it head on, and then with discernment, seeing what's underneath it. And invariably, if it's a strong unchecked desire, if I'm always just snacking when I'm not hungry, something else is going on there. And what does my mindful present in my discernment tell me that is? Too often we shift to autopilot, we just have the snack, and then we're upset because I didn't really need to eat that, pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So let me leave it there, and let's get your thoughts on it.